The queen consort believed she could get away with it unnoticed. Just a private plane warming up on the tarmac at dawn, with no press or ceremony. She didn't anticipate the man in the background, a royal guard who had trained for 17 years to see what others didn't, and instead of simply raising an eyebrow when he noticed something what others missed in her bags, he closed the airport, because it wasn't simply jewelry he found, it was what Queen Elizabeth's personal collection was missing. Now, before we go any further, click the subscribe button and enable notifications, because what happened next wasn't just a royal flight going down. It revealed a scandal that reached the highest levels of the family, and it began in a location where no one was supposed to look 2 days prior. While cleaning the East Drawing Room at Ray Mill House, a charity steward grabbed a fallen pen from under an old cabinet. Elizabeth II, by God's grace, was the case with the crest that made her stomach drop as her fingertips touched chilly velvet. The crown's hair adornment, the kind worn at state banquets and not concealed behind furniture in private homes, was within. It was adorned with sapphires. Palace archivists verified everyone's worst suspicions in a few of hours. A 1977 Commonwealth dinner piece that had been missing since 2019 and was recorded under sovereign possession. It had no right to leave Windsor, much less wind up collecting dust in someone's drawing room. The palace reacted quickly, but without comment. Just encrypted calls and the silent reactivation of the Royal Heritage Task Force, no news conferences. After 17 years with the Coldstream Guards, 2 tours in Helmand, and currently serving with the Royal Collection Trust, Sergeant Rowan Kellen received the call at 6:30 a.m. On the protected line, Princess Anne's message was quite clear. Keep an eye on anything that leaves Ray Mill and Windsor. It flies if it's documented. Otherwise, it remains. The royal family had been hurt by the sapphire ornament. Camilla was directly accused by Princess Anne. Prince William remained silent. King Charles, clearly frightened, declined to make a statement. But familial dynamics were not on Rowan's mind. What else might be missing, he wondered. Sergeant Rowan Kellen would be between those antiques and international airspace if the Queen Consort attempted to remove anything else that wasn't hers, as she had a private flight scheduled for the end of the week. Rowan was tasked with handling household-class diplomatic flight customs inspection at Heathrow's Royal Terminal on Thursday morning. Princess Anne gave a clear order after Ray Mill. Watch Flight GS771. If there are any irregularities, step in. GS771 appeared to be a standard private charter to Geneva. However, the timing, Camilla left the country in secret while the media conjectured about the heirloom issue, causing a fire of damage control. Before daybreak, the first Range Rover came. Before the engines stopped, doors opened. 2 assistants came out. Then Camilla arrived, dressed in a gray coat, big sunglasses, and a scarf wrapped like a person attempting to blend in. Except for a medium trunk that attracted Rowan's notice, the 11 pieces of baggage were all pricey, discreet, and typical of a wealthy traveler's kit. Its weight was difficult for the handler to manage. The wheels were not turning correctly. Under a protective cover, something metallic flashed when dawn light touched its surface. The trunk's hand-riveted corners and endlessly polished brass hardware gave it a truly old-world appearance, and when it slanted, he caught a glimpse of what lay beneath, a circular, tarnished gold crest. While on his Windsor cycle, he had noticed that marking, legacy wing seals for personal belongings of the late Queen, things that were not allowed to leave the castle, much less travel on private aircraft. It was simply described in the manifest as clothes, accessories, and personal effects. No export authorization, no heritage paperwork. Camilla nodded briefly as she walked by him, but Rowan could see the clenching of her jaw. She was aware that he was observing. Rowan had just observed what appeared to be the second half of the Ray Mill affair, and the plane was scheduled to depart British territory in 30 minutes. With 2 inspection lanes, a portable scanner, and a customs bench that saw more coffee breaks than actual luggage checks, the screening area was hardly bigger than a service closet. It would, however, be the front line of something far more significant than travel protocol this morning. Rowan observed as the line of cases moved in the direction of the clearance checkpoint. Designer bags, including jewelry pouches, cosmetics caddies, and 2-wheeled wardrobes, were processed graciously and with adequate documentation. However, one of Camilla's assistants acted with unexpected urgency when they arrived at the suspicious trunk. The man proclaimed, "This one bypasses screening," and he attached a clearance tag on the handle. Before the customs officer could wave it through, Rowan moved forward and said, "Household exemption, direct to aircraft." He said, "I'll need that case on the scanner first." with the subdued authority of someone who didn't have to speak loudly. With a nice suit, a diplomatic smile that stopped short of his eyes, and an early 30s appearance, the aide turned. It's marked exempt under Household Clause 7.3. I understand, but there's a weight discrepancy flagged in the manifest. Standard verification process. The assistant paused. Just one beat. 2. Another voice sliced through the tension like a razor before he could reply. That case does not require scanning. Camilla appeared behind them, with a silent assistant and her legal attaché at her sides. Her voice carried steel wrapped in silk, but her scarf had relaxed a bit, exposing a string of pearls across her throat. Rowan looked over at her. Mom. If there had been any warmth behind it, her lips would have curled into a smile. These are personal belongings, Sergeant, protected under diplomatic customs protocols. I'm aware of the protocols, Mom, but I'm required to verify any case bearing heritage markings, and this trunk displays what appears to be a royal crest. Camilla's legal attaché came forward, her voice taut with barely contained annoyance, and said, "There is no basis for suspicion. The crest suggests otherwise. Legacy wing classification requires documentation that I don't see in the manifest. Sergeant, we've endured quite enough harassment from the Royal Collections watchdogs this week. The Ray Mill incident was a simple misunderstanding, already resolved through proper channels. You are not a customs officer. Your ceremonial detail." Rowan's face remained unchanged. The silence that followed felt as heavy as glass. "Today, I'm whatever the Crown needs me to be." He could see the calculation behind Camilla's eyes as she drew nearer. "If you're implying that I am smuggling, Sergeant, I would suggest you consider the consequences of that accusation." The temperature in the room appeared to drop by 10 degrees. "I'm not implying anything, Mom. I'm protecting sovereign property, especially items that have already been reported missing from secure locations." Without another remark, Camilla turned away after letting out a little, amusing laugh. The trunk sat next to the scanner, like evidence waiting to testify, and her attaché followed after whispering something into his phone. Silently, Rowan marked the case for temporary hold and grabbed for the inspection override. "This violates precedent," the aide protested, but Rowan only held up one hand. He stood next to the trunk and folded his arms, saying, "Then today we set a new precedent." That case was no longer merely suspect. He was determined to keep it on the ground until someone with actual authority came to claim it, since it was the key to everything. With a soft magnetic click, the door to the inspection room closed, leaving Rowan alone with the trunk and the weight of what he was going to see. A man who had learned to spot wrongdoing was given the opportunity to confirm what everyone had previously suspected. No ceremony, no spectacular announcement. Kneeling next to the case, he studied its construction. Brass corners, smoothed by decades of use, leather hands stitched over a hardwood frame. The crest that had captured his eye was there, half hidden under a protective plastic cover, worn gold embossing in a laurel wreath design, the type only the Queen's personal collection had, and underneath it, in tiny, hardly perceptible numbers, LWC 349A. Rowan opened the heritage tracking database on his encrypted tablet. The reference codes were still valid despite the system's age. It was established before everything went digital. He entered the marking and bided his time. As the request was processed through several security clearance levels, the screen wavered. Rowan's jaw tensed when the outcome was revealed. Status of item: unauthorized departure attempt noted. Description: 4 letters of personal correspondence. Maltese pendant, sapphire cross, 1958. Owner: Queen Elizabeth II, sovereign custody. Last permitted location: Legacy Wing, Vault 3B. Security flag: recovery needed. Princess Anne gave her approval. Rowan gazed at the display. This was no ordinary lost heirloom. The smoking gun was this. Since 2022, when it was last spotted at a special dinner at Balmoral, the Malta pendant has been reported missing. Some thought it had been lost in the confusion following the Queen's passing. Others believed it had been distributed informally, as a private present that eschewed formalities. However, there it was, concealed among personal belongings in luggage headed for Switzerland. Even more important were the letters, private letters from Queen Elizabeth, to foreign heads of state, that were judged historically sensitive enough to need to be stored in a vault, the kind of records that exposed a monarch's innermost thoughts, and were never intended for private collection or public consumption. Item 049A is confirmed to be in transit. Rowan said in a brief note to his Royal Collection contact, "Heritage hold is in place. Create a recovery plan." Then, using the emergency route set up for possible scandals, the encrypted household relay, He sent a second message, legacy case detected. Terminal 7 at Heathrow. Departure from Geneva is near. There is a proven heritage breach. I'm requesting prompt supervision. He put the tablet aside after signing it with his service number. Just facts presented to those who would know exactly what to do with them. No drama, no accusations, because there would be no legal repercussions if the trunk got onto Swiss territory. The Crown's power ended when those things entered international jurisdiction and were protected by diplomatic means. No one would ever know. They would never return to history. Someone was going to have to pass through him in order to take a bit of Queen Elizabeth's legacy, so Rowan placed one hand lightly on the trunk surface, protecting it rather than claiming it, and he was more than prepared for that battle after serving for 17 years. The altercation came sooner than anticipated. Oliver Grant, Camilla's legal attaché, stormed into the inspection room with all the righteous rage of someone used to having his way, just as Rowan had just completed recording the trunk's serial numbers. Grant pulled documents out of his bag and declared, "We're ready to sign liability waivers, absolving security of any responsibility. You've made your point, Sergeant. Now release the case, so we can proceed with departure." Rowan remained glued to his tablet. The case has been flagged under Protocol S4B, heritage verification required before international transport. Grant's eyes blinked. That protocol hasn't been activated in decades. Doesn't invalidate its authority. It's designed for suspected foreign interference in royal exports. Rowan gazed up at Grant, confronting his gaze with an awkward lack of tact. When someone attempts to export sealed sovereign property without authorization, I'd say the interference is definitely foreign to proper protocol. Grant took a step forward and spoke in what he likely believed to be a menacing whisper. "You realize this is a royal departure. You're obstructing a sovereign's travel." "No," said Rowan coolly. "I'm temporarily holding a single item pending verification. The passenger is free to board whenever she chooses. The plane can take off on schedule, just not with this particular trunk." There was a long pause between them, full of meanings neither man wanted to express out loud. Rowan went on to say, "I'm not here to create scenes, but if that case leaves this terminal without proper heritage clearance, I'll be filing an official breach report. And once that enters the Royal Archive system, the discretion you're counting on evaporates completely." Grant grew gloomy. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Sergeant." Grant turned and strode out of the room, his phone already at his ear, saying, "I'm not playing anything. I'm protecting what belongs to the Crown, not to any individual member of the royal family." Rowan turned on his tablet's heritage hold protocol, which sent off a series of stealth security checks across the terminal's computer networks. Passengers and employees could not see anything, but every request for entry to that trunk would now result in quarantine. Until someone with Crown-level authority could break the lock, the lawsuit was essentially put on hold. "Legacy trunk confirmed" was the last message he entered into the encrypted relay. "Documented heritage breach. Keep active. Sergeant R. Kellen, waiting for authority." He then stepped back and bided his time. He lacked political influence. He has no royal ancestry or media links. He only had 2 combat tours, 17 years of service, and one unwavering principle, that when you see anything wrong, you don't let it go. Learned in environments where values were more important than protocol. Not until you're told to move aside by someone in a higher position than you. You don't move easily even then. It was a simple knock on the door of the inspection room. 3 solid raps that somehow conveyed more authority than Grant's entire tirade. Queen Camilla herself entered as the door opened. Unannounced, she came in with what appeared to be a legal brief, Grant and a younger aide at her sides. Her heels made a precise clicking sound against the tile floor, as if she had trained to demand attention just by being there. She moved with the practiced assurance of someone who was still very much in charge, which was unusual for a lady who was allegedly escaping disgrace. The trunk was sitting unopened on the inspection table. "You've created quite the delay, Sergeant," she added. "I'm curious what you think you're accomplishing." With his hands clasped behind his back in parade rest, Rowan stood next to the case. "Heritage verification hold has been initiated under Protocol S4B. Mom," there was all the warmth of a winter morning in Camilla's smile. "You're aware that household luggage is exempt from such scrutiny." "Yes, Mom. But this trunk isn't listed under standard household inventory. It bears legacy wing markings that match an item recently recovered at Raymill House, an item that was never authorized for personal relocation." Grant moved forward once again. "We've already explained that the previous issue was a filing error, an administrative oversight that's been corrected. That oversight led to the Crown reclaiming property that has been under sovereign protection since 1990. This case bears identical classification markings, Rowan stated, keeping his gaze fixed on Camilla. Camilla took a step forward, examining his face as intently as if attempting to decipher a foreign language. And you believe I am attempting to smuggle crown property out of the country? I haven't accused anyone of anything specific, Rowan said thoughtfully in response. But I've documented the markings, noted the weight inconsistencies, and triggered verification protocols to prevent another oversight. According to Camilla, this is deeply insulting, as she turned to face the surveillance camera that was installed in the corner. Rowan said nothing. An insult that will have consequences. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed. Grant looked at his timepiece. Departure is scheduled in 18 minutes. When Camilla spoke, her voice became almost icy. Then I suggest you release this case immediately before your career becomes the next casualty of this family's internal paranoia. Rowan didn't flinch as she stared. It hung in the air like smoke from a discharged gun. I'm not here for a career, Mom. I'm here for the crown. For an instant, it felt as though something would break. A command yelled, a danger materialized, a boundary violated, that could not be undone. Rather, Rowan stepped silently back and lightly touched the trunk with one hand. He was merely putting himself between the case and anyone who might attempt to transfer it. He wasn't threatening or asserting ownership. Only he could hear Camilla's voice fade to a whisper. You think a uniform and a protocol manual can stop me? Rowan's answer was just as silent. She looked at him for what seemed like an hour before turning and leaving the room without saying anything more, her coat trailing behind her like a drawn curtain. I think 20 minutes can. Grant followed, his displeasure evident in every movement as he muttered loudly into his phone. Rowan stayed by himself with the trunk and the knowledge that he had just gone too far and couldn't turn back. Holding the line, however, occasionally meant remaining silent and merely putting oneself in the way of those attempting to alter history. There was no fanfare or ceremony to announce arrivals at the perimeter gate of the Royal Terminal. A solitary black Range Rover without diplomatic plates, escort cars, or a visible security force was able to slip through it when it opened quietly and effectively. Through the observation window, Rowan saw the movement and felt his spine automatically straighten. It was Princess Anne. She got out of the car by herself. No press officers, no entourage, nothing ceremonial. Leather gloves, a red folder tucked under her arm like evidence awaiting presentation, and a long dark coat buttoned to the throat. Her footsteps reverberated across the safe hallway with the deliberate cadence of someone who had never had to rush because doors opened as she walked up to them. In the inspection room, she discovered Rowan standing next to the trunk as if he were watching over something valuable. Sergeant. He became completely focused. Mom. She looked around the room, taking in the shut case, the papers that were lying around, and the tablet that was still showing warnings about heritage violations. Status report, crisply. One trunk flagged during outbound screening, Rowan answered. Heritage markings confirmed as Legacy Wing Class 3. Manifest documentation insufficient. Scanning protocols were bypassed under false authority. CEF-4B hold implemented. Case contents match item 049A from the vault system. Anne gave one nod. Camila's response was to first refuse verification and then try to use legal pressure to lift the hold, feared repercussions for hindrance on one's career. Did you examine the contents? Negative, Mom. Awaiting proper authorization. Anne moved in the direction of the inspection table. Without waiting for approval or a formality, she said, then let's see what we're dealing with. She just placed her red folder on the table and opened it to find 3 pages of old records, Queen Elizabeth's own inventory sheets, each inscribed with the former queen's unique handwriting. She picked out a sheet and exposed it to the light. She turned to Rowan and read out loud, Item 049A. Sapphire pendant, Malta diplomatic gift, won once during Commonwealth tour, accompanied by personal correspondence deemed historically significant. Vault classification Legacy Wing Section 3B. Authorization note. She paused, reading her mother's handwriting. Not to leave British soil without Crown consent. Verify the markings. In order to reveal the crest behind its protective covering, Rowan tilted the trunk toward the overhead light. He breathed softly, describing the piece exactly like the one recovered at Raymill. Confirmed match. Gold laurel pattern. Outer rim showing age wear. Serial numbers correspond to vault documentation. Before she could say another word, the door opened. Camilla didn't knock and went in. Oliver Grant followed closely. When she noticed Anne standing next to the opened documents, she came to a sudden stop. Anne spoke before Camilla was able to say anything. We recovered one heirloom from your private estate. You never reported it missing. You never explained how it got there. And now a second case with matching markings, matching vault classifications, is being moved out of the country under false documentation. Camilla's calmness wavered a bit. Those items were personal effects given to me privately by the Queen herself during informal moments. They were never part of official state collections. With her mother's handwriting clearly evident, Anne held up the inventory sheet. Then perhaps you can explain why they're still listed here in Mother's own hand, with explicit instructions that they remain under Crown protection. In an attempt to step in, Grant said, "Your Royal Highness, with respect." Anne didn't give him a look. "The trunk stays." Camilla opened her mouth to protest, but she didn't say anything. Rowan watched history play out in real time as he stood still next to the case, because someone with actual authority had walked into the room for the first time since the Ray Mill scandal, and suddenly it was all going to be different. The inspection room's quiet seemed fragile, liable to break at the first incorrect word. "Sergeant Kellen," Princess Anne replied, her gaze never leaving Camilla's face as she broke it with surgical precision. "Open the trunk." Rowan didn't hesitate to move. Just the silent effectiveness of someone carrying out lawful orders. No pomp and circumstance. With gentle clicks, the brass latches came loose, and the lid rose to reveal a neatly lined, cream silk interior. Everyone was astounded by the contents. 4 letters that had vanished from safekeeping were in archival sleeves, their envelopes containing the distinctive handwriting of Queen Elizabeth II. The sapphire cross of Malta was now tucked away in the middle, covered in protective linen, and crammed between scarves like illegal goods. The pendant, a 1958 diplomatic gift that was worn during a Commonwealth visit, was reduced to smuggled luggage after it grabbed the fluorescent light and threw it back in vivid blue bits. It was clearly a handcrafted scene from the early 1950s, completely irreplaceable, irreproducible, and irreplaceable. The matching inventory page, Mother's own paperwork, was pulled out of her folder by Anne. Quote, "Multi-pendant and associated correspondence to remain with archival collection, not to be exported, gifted, or divided from Crown holdings," 2 times highlighted. Camilla remained silent. Her chin was still up in obstinate silence, but her face had become pale. Grant tried one more time. "Your Royal Highness, there's no evidence of criminal intent. These could have been confused with other items after the Queen's passing. Administrative errors happened during transitions." They weren't confused, Anne cut in, her tone piercing his justifications like a knife. "They were removed. One piece ended up hidden at Raymill. This collection was about to be flown to Switzerland. Both sets belong to the Crown, not to any individual." Rowan started meticulously recording every item. Photographic evidence, custody envelopes, archival gloves, everything required to create an unbroken chain of custody. He handled the letters as though they were composed of spider silk, each one revealing a monarch's innermost feelings, in addition to their historical significance. The necklace was placed in a customized recovery case that was identified as belonging to the sovereign estate. Since this was no longer an ownership dispute, no one attempted to stop him at all. This served as proof. Anne turned to face the senior security guard who had shown up at the entrance and said, "These items are to be transported to Windsor under Crown custody protocols. Sergeant Kellen will accompany them. Full documentation, unbroken chain of custody. Nothing leaves this terminal without proper authorization." "Yes, ma'am." Camilla did not move as Rowan closed the last container. Though not disregarded, it is no longer pertinent to the discussion. "Mother trusted you to walk beside the Crown," Anne whispered softly, drawing her sister-in-law closer until she was speaking directly to Camilla. She picked up her folder, turned, and left the room with the same quiet power that had brought her there, saying, "Not to take pieces of it when you thought no one was watching. Just finality. No threats, no ceremony, no guards." After putting the final seal on the evidence containers, Rowan took a step back. The case was, in all respects, closed. By the time Sergeant Rowan Kellen came out of the terminal, the jet engines were already spinning up to take off power. This time, however, he moved without haste, and his shoulders were relaxed. A Crown security van, presently parked just outside the service gate, had been used to secure, document, and load the heritage items. Princess Anne herself had signed and stamped the amended custody files, which were waiting inside with another Windsor officer. The mission has been completed. Letters are safe, heirlooms are retrieved, and the legacy is preserved. It would leave something significant behind, but the airplane would leave on time. Turning, Rowan saw Queen Camilla come out of the inspection corridor again. She still exuded a royal demeanor, with her head held high, her spine straight, and her motions under control, but something had been taken away from her, that was invisible to the outer world, possibly authority, or just the assurance that comes from thinking you are above the law. Her surviving assistants were like anxious shadows on either side of her, accepting commands instead of providing them. Without saying a word, she ascended the airplane stairs, her heels hitting the metal rungs with purposeful accuracy. She stopped at the top, only to gather herself before vanishing into the cabin, not to wave or acknowledge anyone. Pneumatic finality closed the door behind her. Oliver Grant took a while to follow. His eyes flicked to Rowan as he stood on the tarmac, talking to ground staff in clipped tones. However, the fire had extinguished. The threats of legal action had vanished. The practical matter of leaving was the only thing left to do. His gaze went unnoticed by Rowan. Princess Anne was waiting by the open door of the Range Rover parked outside the security cordon, and he was already making his way toward it. As he came closer, she gave him the smallest acknowledgement nod. Simply, "You held the line," she said. Rowan thought about this for a while. Her attempt was to make history into luggage. Anne's mouth twitched almost like a smile. History is not without its repercussions. The jet's engines roared to life behind them, and the plane started taxiing toward the runway. Rowan turned to see how everything was going. There was no fanfare or ceremony, just a silent departure beneath a sky that had at last made the decision to become brighter. Camilla was heading out. The whole tale would never be known to the public, not right away, and most likely never. Speculation, well-crafted remarks, and the customary dance of royal crisis management would all be present. However, what was important remained on British soil, protected by those who knew that duty wasn't always accompanied with headlines. Without any fanfare, Anne got into the Range Rover. The door shut, the engine roared to life, and the car backed out of the terminal as stealthily as it had come, until the plane's wheels lifted off the ground and its lights vanished into the dawn sky. Rowan stayed on the tarmac. Then he gave himself permission to take a deep breath. Not triumph, not pride, simply the silent fulfillment that comes from doing the right thing when no one else is around. Because he had ultimately failed to save a life or avert a catastrophe, he had stopped a heritage from being stolen, and that was sufficient at times. In order to preserve crown legacy, should a royal guard have the power to halt a queen's luggage? Was Princess Anne right to step in and retrieve the items herself? And would you have put everything on the line to maintain that line if you had been Sergeant Rowan Kellen? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. We read each and every one. Click like now if you think Sergeant Kellen did the right thing by putting duty before convenience and tradition over rank. Make sure you have notifications enabled on your subscription so you don't miss any of the stories that show you what truly goes on behind the most secure doors of the monarchy. Tell someone who thinks that Queen Elizabeth's legacy should never have been transported across borders or hidden away in private collections. You are precisely the type of viewer for whom we write these stories, if you are still here. Click on the next video that appears on your screen. We'll see you tomorrow with another tale that demonstrates that sometimes the most significant conflicts are waged in silence by those who never claim victory.